sorry about the words I'm about to say. I know it will be a little disconcerting. George Spencer is our speaker tonight, and we're thrilled to have him here. And he's executive director of the Alumni Magazine. Dartmouth. Not Colby, Dartmouth. All right? And as much as he loves the big ring, he prefers dark blue, he went to Duke, okay? He lives up here in Lebanon. Well, no, up here. Sort of down there. He moved to New Hampshire on New Year's Eve. Prior to that, he lived in Chapel Hill. Before living in Chapel Hill, George lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. He studied at the University of Tennessee, not Colgate, in Knoxville, where he earned a law degree and an MBA. While in Knoxville, he worked for a major Time Incorporated subsidiary and ran business, health, lifestyle, and travel magazines. He also, prior to the book that, and I actually made an executive decision, he was going to present about Courage 101, True Tales of Grit and Glory, but he also wrote The Happiest Baby on the Block, which I think would be really fascinating. No. He wrote The Happiest Toddler on the Block and also The Happiest Baby on the Block. He's currently working on the special issue of Dartmouth's Alumni Magazine that celebrates...
They're in New Hampshire, aren't they?
Yeah, but with your whole love of Colgate, 250th anniversary next year. How long is
200.
You're not helping yourself here. All right. His hobby is painting. He's working with CATV, his local cable access station, to create 101 documentaries based on the book, one for each chapter of his book. Finally, before working for Dartmouth, George was editor of publication of the ABA, not the American Bar Association, but the American Bus Association, and in fact, that had some members, including Conway Scenic Railroad, Mount Washington Cog Railroad, Merrill Farm Inn and Resort, and the Wildcat Inn and Tavern. I am thrilled that George made the trip all the way up here from Lebanon. Please welcome George Spencer.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm thrilled. I don't think anybody's ever stood up to me like that before. I almost feel like I'm running.
That's what you changed.
Pardon me?
You changed.
I've changed. I almost feel like I'm running for office, but we're kind of all tired of that. Move right along. So you can tell I talk a bit funny. It's because I'm not from around here. I'm from western New Hampshire. We talk a little bit funny.
And I'm a little on border there.
I try and enunciate clearly. First off, I love charts and graphs, and I think they still, on USA Today at the bottom of the page, they have a chart and a graph, and one day they had a chart that was the things people are most afraid of. It was a top 10 list. The second thing that people are most afraid of, the number 2 thing is global thermonuclear warfare. But the number 1 thing people are afraid of is public speaking. And so what I'm doing is giving a talk on courage in public, so you must be very brave in front of you all. So I wrote the book, Courage 101, here it is, and it has 101 stories in it about things that famous people did that you don't know about, untold stories. It also has stories about unsung heroes that you may never have heard of. 101 chapters, short, fast, quick, easy to read, and it's on Kindle too. So first off, courage. Courage literally means having heart. That's exactly what it means, because the word courage comes to us from a Latin and a French word for heart. And when you think about it, when you're called upon to do something courageous, you feel it in your heart. And that's because courage and fear are kind of flip sides of the same coin. In fact, there's a famous quote, "Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." And who else could have said that but John Wayne? Somebody who had to saddle up when the times were hard. Eddie Rickenbacker, who was a famous World War I ace, before that, he was a race car driver. He was in the Indianapolis 500 4 times, world speed record 136 miles an hour before World War I. 2 terrible plane crashes, one in the South Pacific. He was in a life raft for weeks with 4 oranges and 4 men. And he said, "Courage is doing what you're afraid of doing. There can be no courage unless you are scared. There can be no courage unless you are scared." So what I want to do tonight is tell you about 6 different stories from the book of different kinds of courage. There's social courage, physical courage, intellectual courage, spiritual courage, and sometimes they're kind of mixed up. It's not all physical sometimes, it's a combination of things. And you know, some stories are kind of lighthearted and some are more serious. But as Mark Twain said, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight and the dog. So whatever kind of courageous act you're called upon to do, it takes courage in some shape or fashion. And I'm going to start out with 1 or 2 stories from New England. And the first story is about a New Hampshire inventor. And his first name was Earl. I'm not going to tell you his last name because it would give away kind of the punchline of the story. So his first name was Earl. It's 1949, and he's invented a product. And it's sold in department stores all over the country. But down in Florida, there's a lady named Brownie Wise. She's divorced, she has a son, she's working as a sales clerk in a department store. They're having a birthday party in the back room, a table filled with cakes and snacks. And a container falls off the table, and everybody jumps back because it should break. Because in those days, containers were made out of glass. But it doesn't break, it kind of makes a thump on the ground. And it's made out of plastic. And that's because Earl Tupper had invented Tupperware. And so Brownie is a pretty smart cookie. And she says, well, this is great, this is fantastic. And the guy says, no, it's a terrible product, nobody buys it. You know, it costs 39 cents. Back in those days, 39 cents was $5.50. But she's very smart, and she figures out the way to sell this is you have parties at home for women. Get a group of women together, get them having a good time, and they'll buy like crazy. So this lady's got moxie. She calls up Earl in New Hampshire. Earl's a great inventor and scientist. He doesn't know anything about marketing. So she becomes one of his representatives. She starts this home selling thing. And so she does so well down there in Florida. In 1951, he hires her as the vice president of marketing and sales. Her motto was, you build the people and they build the business. 3 years later, Brownie was such a hard-charging female executive. And this is the time, there's no Oprah Winfrey, there's none of this. She's the first. And she was the first woman to be on the cover of Business Week. That's what hot stuff she was. And she mostly built this company in a couple of years into a $25 million business. And in today's dollars, that's a $230 million business. Okay? By 1958, she had 10,000 independent contractors all around the country. Lady with real guts and moxie. Of course, Earl owned the company, and Earl really wasn't a modern-minded guy, and they had a big fight one day. Earl wanted to expand the brand into dog food containers. She thought that would destroy the brand, destroy the image. They had a big fight one day. And Earl said to her, now you listen to me, woman. I do the manufacturing and you do the selling. Brownie had courage again, and she stood up to him and said, woman, is that the way you address your wife? So she had guts. Earl dismissed her. It was his company. But she stood up for what she believed in, and she built a huge company. Another New England story. 1925, it's Saturday night, the night before Easter. A couple college kids sitting in their dorm. This kid named Ted Soyce has got a bottle of gin. They get caught. Night before Easter, pretty bad. So the dean calls him in on Monday and he says, Ted, you know, this is really bad what you've done. I got to punish you. And you know, what am I going to do? I think, you know, you like to draw cartoons all the time. You like to draw cartoons for the school magazine. You can't do this anymore. I forbid you to participate in this extracurricular activity. Next issue of the magazine comes out, and it still has cartoons that look like his cartoons in the magazine, except they're not signed with his name. They're signed with all these made-up, strange names like Dr. Soyce. And so that's how he pronounced the name. That was his middle name. His name was Theodore Soyce Gazelle. We know him as Dr. Seuss. So he became a commercial illustrator, did very well in the 1930s, but he wanted more. He wrote a children's book, and the title of the book was A Story No One Can Beat. Do you know that this guy, in those days you used to take your manuscript physically to publishers' offices. He took his portfolio with his drawings. You get to 26 publishers. Dr. Seuss was turned down by 26 publishers in person, all in a row, middle of the Depression. They said, your book's too silly. They said your book has no moral message. They said your rhyme scheme's old-fashioned, anapestic tetrameter. Forget about it. So he's walking home. He's just on the sidewalk in Manhattan, and he's devastated. He's 26 times he's been turned down. This is the book that became, and I think I saw it on Mulberry Street about little boy's fantasies walking home. Well, who comes walking down the sidewalk toward him? One of his college classmates. His college classmate says, "Ted, you look awful. You look like you're going to die." And he says, "I've written a book nobody wants to read. I'm going to take it home and burn it." And he says, "Well, wait a second, Ted. This is true." He says, "This morning I got hired as an editor of a children's book company." He says, show me your stuff here on the sidewalk." He opens up his portfolio with the drawings in it. He says, "Ted, we're going to my company. I'm taking you to the president's office." An hour later, he had a book deal. An hour later. It took 20 years for Dr. Seuss to become Dr. Seuss with the Cat in the Hat. But he wrote 66 books. Today there's 650 million copies of those books in print in like 20 languages. And you know, think about his characters like the Lorax who stands up for trees, the Grinch who has the courage to abandon his greediness, Horton who stands up for little Cindy Lou Who. His life was all about teaching children to be courageous. Just think if he had given up and burned that. Now, a story about a lady who really didn't give up, and that was her motto, "I don't give up." And this is a more serious story. Julianne Capecchi, on New Year's Eve, or Christmas Eve, 1971, she just graduated from high school, a little different schedule in Peru. She's just graduated from high school, she's wearing a white mini dress. She gets on an airplane with her mother to fly to see her father on Christmas to a remote town in Peru. They're flying over the Amazon jungle at 21,000 feet, like 20 minutes after noon. Terrible rainstorm. She looks out the window, sees a glistening light in the wing. It's lightning. The wing falls off, the plane explodes. Next thing she knows, she wakes up and she's looking down and she's thinking, "I'm flying into a field of broccoli." And that's because she was so high up, the canopy of the rainforest looked like broccoli. Next thing she knows, she wakes up, she's upside down, she's still strapped into her seat. No wreckage around, no other people. She's lost her glasses, she's lost a sandal, she has no food, she has a bag of candy, doesn't know where her mother is. Looks for her mother, can't find her. After a day, she says, "Nobody's coming, or they can't see me or hear me. I gotta walk out." Took her 11 days with no food to walk out of the Amazon. Now, she did have one advantage, and that's because her father was a biologist and her mother was an ornithologist, and she knew things like, when she started swimming in the river, she swam in the river for days. She knew that the Cayman alligators weren't going to attack her. And she knew that the piranha congregated in stagnant water, and they weren't going to attack her either. But it took her 11 days, and she didn't give up. Like Dr. Seuss, she didn't give up, and like Brownie Wash, she didn't give up, and she made it out. She's the only one that survived. Her mother survived, but was too injured to move out. Another story. This is a story that some of you may recognize this person. And if you know who this is, you know, raise your hand or something like that. This is the only person to win 2 Oscars for the same role. He won 2 Oscars for the same role. And he won, one was an honorary Oscar because the Academy thought he wasn't going to win an Oscar because it's the first movie he was ever in, and he wasn't an actor. In December 1941, Harold Russell was a meat cutter in a grocery store. He thought he was just the biggest failure in life. That's all he was doing is working behind the counter. And he wanted to go fight. Uncle Sam said, "No, you can't go to Europe and fight. You're going to stay in the States and train people how to use explosives." D-Day comes, he's still doing training exercises, but there's a delay. He's down in Georgia, it's very hot. He's doing a show for the troops. Teaching them how to use explosives, blows up. Both his hands are gone. Both his hands are gone. Harold Russell. He's in Walter Reed, and you can imagine he's worse than Dr. Seuss. But he sees a morale film about a World War I vet who lost his hands and became a millionaire in real estate. He says, "I want to meet this guy." And that man did come to Walter Reed, and he met him, and he said, and he took to it. He said, "I'm going to overcome all these obstacles." And so he was so good at using his hooks that the Army put him in a morale film. The morale film was seen by director William Wilder, who was casting a movie. And this movie was so good, in 1946 it won Best Oscar over It's a Wonderful Life. That's how good this movie was. It's the best years of our lives, about 3 soldiers returning from war back to hometown America and how they adapt. One's a banker, one's a bomber pilot, and then there's Harold Russell's character, who was a sailor who lost both hands in the war. This movie, you think about how people used to regard handicapped people. This movie shows Harold Russell opening a pack of cigarettes, dialing a telephone, and in the movie even putting a wedding ring on his girlfriend's finger at the end. In real life, Harold Russell became the chairman of AMVETS, a veterans group. He founded the World Veterans Foundation. President Kennedy appointed him vice chairman of the President's Committee on Employment of the Handicapped. Johnson and Nixon reappointed him. He was married, had 4 children, had a gang of great-grandchildren. An incredible life, because he wouldn't give up. I don't give up. That was his motto, too. And the movie is fantastic. If you haven't seen it in a long time, it really is a really fantastic movie. Now an even deeper story. This is another story that begins on December 1941. We were in Vienna, Austria. Viktor Frankl is a psychotherapist. He's Jewish. He's just gotten a visa to come to the United States. Unfortunately, his parents were not issued a visa. He doesn't know what to do. Should he leave or should he stay? The Nazis already occupy Austria, and they all know that something bad's going to happen. So he goes for a walk, thinking a hint from heaven might come. He comes back home, and in his absence, his father has gone to a synagogue that's been burned down and has retrieved one of the tablets of the 10 Commandments, a fragment of it. And Victor can read on there, he reads in Hebrew, honor thy parents. He says, I'm staying, I'm staying. So the Nazis send them all to Theresienstadt, which is a ghetto and a concentration camp. His wife, too, he's married. And over time, they're separated. Victor is sent to Auschwitz, he's sent to Dachau. And he notices that he's a doctor. He notices that some people just give up. They think that we'll be freed by a certain date. When that day comes and goes, they lose hope, and they just wither away in a matter of days. And he got very interested in this. Why do 2 people are identical, and why does one give up, and why does one not give up? And so he thought deeply on this, and he realized that, and of course when he was seized, he was so naive, he thought he could take his manuscript to the concentration camp. The Nazis took that, they took his clothes, shaved his hair off, they took everything from him, took everything he had. And he realized when you're no longer able to change a situation, you're challenged to change yourself. Because the one thing that no one can take from you is what's in here, your attitude, in your mind. And that's the one thing you own that no one can take. And you realize that no one can rob you of your spiritual power to transform seemingly meaningless suffering into a noble achievement. And he realized that was his duty, to suffer with nobility under the worst circumstances. And he wrote a book immediately after being liberated called Man's Search for Meaning. It sold 12 million copies in 24 languages. You can download it for free on the internet, and it tells about his life and struggle, and extraordinarily inspiring. And there's a man who wouldn't give up under the worst circumstances, because he knew that even if everything is taken from you, you've still got what's between your ears. Well, a slightly more modern version of that story, James Bond Stockdale was the highest-ranking naval officer held in North Vietnamese prisons during the Vietnamese War. 7.5 years, 4 years in solitary confinement, tortured 15 times. He was actually flying in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which the destroyer said it was being attacked. It was the middle of the night, thunderstorm. He went out shooting like crazy. It turned out that there was a sonar radar malfunction. There was no North Vietnamese attack. The Johnson administration did its sleight of hand, and they said somebody was attacking our ship, and therefore they got to expand the war because of this. Stockdale's furious because he knows it's a law, he was involved, and he knows a lot of people are going to die because of this. Well, when he gets shot down, he realizes that we're also in a propaganda war. If the North Vietnamese can break him, they'll use his knowledge to humiliate the United States. And so one day they wanted to parade him out in front of cameras, international television. He wasn't going to have this. He'd hidden a razor blade. He slashed his scalp and he beat his face with his fist, so he was a bloody mess, and they couldn't use him for propaganda purposes. Stockdale won 2 Purple Hearts, Medal of Honor winner. You may remember he was Ross Perot's running mate. And so Stockdale said, do the right thing, even if it means dying like a dog when there's no one there to see it. It's pretty hardcore, and there are not many men or women like that. He lived up to that. So to end on a little bit lighter note, a little bit happier note, another New England story. It's a story about a lady named Anna Moses. A poor lady, she worked as a housemaid most of her life. She and her husband were able to save money to buy a farm. She had 10 children, 5 died in infancy. 5 over 10 children died in infancy. But she kept going, kept going. She's 80 years old. She loves to quilt. She can't quilt anymore because she can't handle the needle and thread. Her daughter says, you know, Mom, when you were a little girl, didn't you like to paint? Why don't you try that? And so she starts painting, and she takes her jams and jellies and her paintings to the county fairs. People buy her jams and jellies, paintings they don't buy. She says, oh, well, I'll take them to the drugstore. They'll put them in the window. Put them in the window of the drugstore in Hoosick Falls, New York. They sit there for months. Nobody buys them. Till one day a wealthy art collector is passing through town. He looks in the window, goes in and says, how much are the paintings? They say, oh, $3 a piece. He says, I'll buy them all. He takes them to art galleries all around Manhattan. And a year later, Anna Grandma Moses had a painting at a show at the Museum of Modern Art. She became an instant sensation. Her work was licensed for draperies, coffee cans, lipstick, and she lived to be 101. And 80 years old, kept going, didn't give up, even though nobody would buy her paintings. And she always liked to say, life is what we make it. Always has been, always will be. And so for Dr. Seuss, for a woman stranded in the jungle, for men in prison camps, for Anna Moses, life is what you make of it. No one can take away what you've got between your ears. And I'll end with a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. Courage is more exhilarating than fear, and in the long run it's easier. We do not have to become heroes overnight, just a step at a time, meeting each thing that comes up. It is not as dreadful as it appeared, discovering we have the strength to stare it down. Thank you for having me here. You know, just people's stories who interested me. And if you go to, I challenged myself to write. This is a 100,000-word book, and I challenged myself to write 101 chapters in about 100 days. And I did that. And frankly, before I came up, you know, I was working for ABA, the Bus Association. A different publisher came in. I lost my job. I was unemployed for a few months. I didn't have a heck of a lot to do, you know. And so I thought I'm going to use this time productively. I challenged myself, and went to the library a lot and picked up books off the shelves. And you'd be amazed what you can find out about things that happened in people's childhoods that helped make them who they became.
You know, so many of your stories, and I know they're short stories, are the stuff that movies are made of. You know, has anybody ever, you know, contacted you, or your agent ever tried to sell any of them to the movie industry?
No, I wish. The Brownie Wise story actually is going to be a movie in a year or two.
There you go.
A lady, I can't think of her name, starred in Gravity. I can't think of her name.
Sandra Bullock.
Sandra
Sandra
Bullock.
Bullock. There'll be a Sandra Bullock in a movie in a year or two. That'll be funny.
Huh.
When I was a kid, my mom used to read me a story about a kid who was lost on Mount Katahdin in Maine. Don Fendler, did you ever hear about that? Or he was lost on Katahdin for like 12 days, just a kid. And it's amazing, his heroic story. And so
apparently a lot of time, little children survive because they don't think the way adults do. And they have some different way of
That's interesting.
that's exactly what happened now.
Yeah, dealing with their situation.
Yeah.
I thank you all.
My mom read me. Like,
It was kind of a hero. Pokey puppy.
well set. So let me.
Chip, you got it.
Darlene. Thank you.
I don't know if anyone else paid, but
Yes,
that's
they
my
have.
choice.
Yeah.
Food choice line.
I've been getting money.
That's mine, and I wrote on the back.
Thank you. Yes.
Read it to see that you want to get one. You want me to take it back to mail it to Liz?
Yeah, I'll
I
get one.
on at 9 o'clock in the morning. I can't believe it. Like that. I would come. I'm gonna get a call. Like at 8 o'clock in the
I'm gonna check the ritual.
Or I would say family members like that. You gotta get like a van. So,